Open the hearing on House Bill 1474. Would the clerk read the title, please?
Relating to a property tax exemption for new single-family condominium and townhouse residential property to provide a penalty and to provide an effective date.
Thank you. Representative Toman.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, including junior member Porter. For the record, my name is Nathan Toman, representative from Mandan, Bismarck's western upper-class suburb, here to present House Bill 1474 to the committee. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 1474 seeks to move away from valuation for taxation purposes on residential properties and move it towards a square footage calculation, which the land and the structures would be separated into that calculation. This is probably the longest bill in pages that you would have ever seen me introduce, and probably will. The reason for that is the mechanism switching from valuations and mills to square footage requires touching multiple pieces of code for all the different taxing districts. And this is also designed to work with any existing credits or exemptions. So some of that language is throughout. I have kind of a summary here, but I will just touch on the thrust of the bill, which is the square footage, and that lies in section 18. Structure square foot for land is separated minus any of the buildings on that parcel, and then the square footage of the structures is calculated without any of the land, and that's above grade square footage for the structures. Done some work on this over the past several years, calculations and working with past city commissioners, and just my irritation of liability, which your home is a liability until you liquidate it, and if you liquidate it, it's still a liability if you have a loan on it. So I'm tired of getting taxed, and I'm tired of my constituents getting taxed on the unrealized gains on their residential property. And so the calculations I've come up with is square footage, and I think as that rises, all boats float, like a rising tide floats all boats. So as an example, in Mandan, you have Lakewood area, and then you have Old Downtown area. Could be similar lot sizes, could be similar structure sizes above grade, and yet you're taxed more dollars down in the Lakewood area and less dollars in Old Town area, or it could be vice versa. And the question that I would put to you is why is that? Are they receiving more city services? And in the situation of Old Town being taxed less, I would say that I'm more of a burden because we have older streets in that area as opposed to newer streets in the newer sections of Mandan. So it can work with, I believe it can work with all cities and counties. It's residential, so if you're in the county, it's going to be residential. The one caveat there is we will have to pass a relief bill that will maybe zero out some of the property tax rises. So the example I put to you in my district of Mandan, I would probably get in dollars more taxation because the square footage is the same, where that in the initial year, the higher value with the similar square footage would lower because that square footage is calculated across all classes of property. There's no modifier. So it can work on the low limited income folks because typically they have a smaller structure and a smaller lot size. But to mitigate any unintended consequences, because this is not a tax relief bill, this is a tax reform bill, we would need to pass some sort of quantitative tax relief, whether that's 1176, whether that's taking the 60 mills of schools, whether that's the 70% tax credit, or any other flavors that we've heard of. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Representative Toman, can you just address the impacts to the local political subdivisions on this change?
Mr. Chairman, this is not a tax reduction. bill, so they would be collecting the same. They'd look at their budget and they'd say, okay, what's our square footage, which they know that, and the assessor could get all the new or unknowns would be the assessor's role, is to make sure that the square footage is correct. And then they figure out that square footage calculation for the lot minus the structures, and the structures minus the lot, which could be two different, 25 cents per square foot for lot versus $1 per home, whatever that would be, right? And so the goal is to have a net zero for the city. So year one, they would collect the same in dollars or whatever their budget is, right? So if the budget is 3% more, then they're going to still collect 3% more dollars, because that's calculated out across the classes of, or the one class of property.
So the dollars would remain the same, but they would be shifted, the burden would be shifted from one property to the other, depending on the valuation of the property prior to the switch.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. That,
So
the
this
goal
is a
to-
big tax shift.
Yeah, it's shifted now. It's progressive now. This is still a little progressive, because if you have a high value home, Mr. Chairman, you already have a larger lot, you already have a larger home. If the city's worried about the $1 million Lakewood homes, I mean, they're still going to pay more, but it's still going to be more fair, because if I have that same home square footage in Old Town and a larger lot, there's one south on 1806 that could be impacted, but it's already valued high. It's on 2 acres of land and it's a fairly large home, so they could get dinged. Still a little progressive. I still think it's better than value, because you continue to see your value, your tax and dollars go up because of the valuations. So I think along with the caps and with the relief, this is very workable for year one. And then moving forward, they are going to be tasked with being held to their decision to raise taxes and dollars on their citizens. So.
Thank you for that answer. Representative Toman, can you tell me, is there anywhere in the United States or in the world for that matter that has chosen to shift away from valuations to square footage that you're aware of? Is the practice working anywhere, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Mr. Chairman, I have not done any research on that. I was just using local data. I believe some of it, Burleigh County last session worked with a representative from that area, and it can work. The question becomes of, what are the disadvantages on the low end? And I think there's really no losers on the low value property, because you're looking at property, unless you're in a very rural, like in a flasher, you're not looking at, in Mandan, you're not getting $100,000 house, right? You're looking at the median. So it's really going to separate from that value, and the stealth increases through the valuations in the mill. So, but it does not shackle the cities with tax decrease, right? It provides surety for them, so they don't have to wait for equalization. They know the square footage, they know what their square footage amount has got to be, so they already know that can or can't work in the budget without having to wait for equalization. And this does provide for the same things as it does now. You can protest. The mechanism is there for protest, so it's just the protest of the square footage versus the value, and so if there's a miscalculation there, so.
But you would admit that it's going to shift burden from higher valued properties to lower valued properties.
I think
based on this, how big the building is, or the home, or
Mr. Chairman, I think, if you're looking at someone in a 1950s house that's a mansion, so to speak, right, that would work, but would shift, right? But if you're looking at a 50s house on a third of an acre lot, like in all those 50s subdivisions in Mandan, you're looking at, those folks are probably not going to be the big losers, unless the city gets greedy, right, and makes that per square foot rate.
I'm just thinking about the home that I grew up in out on our farm that is now a rental property, and it's a big home. There was 8 of us that grew up in it, and I don't think they're paying a lot now, but I think if we made this switch, that there would be additional burden placed on that home that certainly I don't see as being proper myself, but
Mr.
you've
Chairman,
already addressed the fact that it will shift burden. So
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to that, I do have in our family farm area, there's individual that has purchased part of one of the homesteads and is taxed currently as residential, right? So ideally, we could make that work where that is not a tax reduction because it's on higher acreage, it's a larger home, and, but I don't have the actual math in front of me to refute or prove that. So, but that would be the goal, is to try to make sure that the winners and losers are not a huge discrepancy. The low fixed income folks are not going to be brought up to pay what median income level
We
is.
could probably figure it out, but we really don't know.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it's workable. Yeah. That's why I mentioned there has to be a tax relief portion that we pass, because what we don't want is we don't want to change from valuation to square footage. And then we raise 50% of constituents' taxes and we didn't solve the problem that they're complaining about. But we did solve the problem of continued increases through stealth and arbitrary valuation. So.
Any questions for Representative Toman? Thank you for your testimony. Further support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ben Koppelman, District 16, in support of House Bill, I believe we're on 1474, is that right? The bill number. If you remember when I brought the 70% bill, I mentioned kind of a broader plan of the 3 R's that I think are what's needed to be addressed in a certain order. And the first order was basically reforming the system. And valuation is what really undermined every single property tax relief plan we've ever passed in the legislature that I'm aware of. It's always been valuation. The valuation always allowed locals to gobble that relief up without consequence, really, because they'd say, well, we didn't raise your taxes, we're charging the same mills, or in some cases they'd reduce mills and still, in terms of dollars, raise your taxes and eat that relief away. I also wanted to point out, I don't know if that I heard it in the bill sponsor's testimony, but what we have right now is really a disincentive to fix your property and keep it maintained well, because you don't want to pay more tax. And I hear a lot of people are like, oh, geez, I don't want to do this because the tax assessor is going to come out and charge me and penalize me for residing my house or putting new windows in or things of that nature. And then a lot of cities have to figure out a government option with government money on how to subsidize all their neighborhoods so that they can get them fixed up, because all these people don't want to fix them up because they're worried about being taxed more. So then they're like, oh, we got to subsidize a low interest loan, or we got to have some sort of a Renaissance district or some sort of other TIF district to try to revitalize blighted neighborhoods, because there's been a disincentive to fix your house. So I'm suggesting that if you had something that was essentially an incentive to fix your house because you want it to be worth more, because that can't be held against you at tax time, I think that would be a positive improvement on things. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Seems like a decision made locally would be helpful, and maybe the locals need to understand who they're voting for if they won't allow, if they're raising taxes at such a level that they choose not to update and maintain their homes. It just seems
Mr.
contrary
Chairman,
to what we're trying to accomplish.
all you need to do is look at some of the emails or testimony that you've seen in opposition to cap bills, and you'll find out why that's the motivation. Because we hear that cities can't possibly exist on 3% growth. They can't possibly stay within the numbers of inflation. And so they use this as a mechanism. And I think it's interesting that cities really, if you extrapolate what they say in those emails and look at the behavior over time, and you say, if I lived in that city 50 years and I was a school teacher or whatever, just where I got maybe like a year over year inflationary type increase, but I never really changed careers, jumped way ahead, whatever, that I'd have less discretionary income when I retire than I did the year I started, because the government's taking the money away faster than I'm growing my salary. And that's what really, I think many of us are trying to avoid in a lot of these property tax relief programs. So.
Would you quickly want to address the shift in burden from expensive properties to less valued properties that will occur if we pass this bill?
Well, Mr. Chairman and committee members, I think that there will be some winners and losers in the way this bill comes across. I don't think the bill sponsor is wrong, though, that there are a lot of properties that you might consider in the bottom third of valued properties that won't be negatively affected just by the metrics of their property because they have less square feet and they have a smaller lot and so on. But there will be winners and losers. And that's why it's important to pass this along with a substantial property tax relief and a restraint plan, which is the gaps. I had then modeled this originally, had a similar bill draft, decided to co-sponsor Representative Toman's instead of do my own. And but when I modeled it, I had modeled it on actually my 70% plan that I presented was actually originally presented in concert with this, so that it would say whatever your building tax was, the government would pay that. The state would pay that as a homestead tax credit. If you're primary residence, you'd be left with your land tax. And the idea was that's kind of similar to that of the farm homestead exemption, where you don't pay on your building, you just pay on your land. That was the big picture logic of it. But as all these different tax ideas came forward, it seemed obvious that I had to kind of divorce my relief plan from the square footage plan. And that's where I came up with the 70%. It was closest aligned to what I had.
So really, the bill needs relief in that 70% range in order for it to make
Mr.
it
Chairman,
fair.
if you don't do the relief and the restraint, which is the caps, I wouldn't recommend doing this bill without those.
Thank you. Further testimony in support.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Mike Blessum from Minot. Real excited to be in front of you on a bill that I can support and be excited about. This one, I think, takes a great step forward towards what I'm looking for, which is really changing structurally how we do things, which in my opinion is your main role in this entire process, is setting the framework for the state rather than pushing the dollars down, as I've talked about repeatedly. So first of all, one of the really elegant things that this does very well that I didn't realize until last night as I read through it is it divorces us from the idea of paying a piece of the pie as a residential property owner, okay? That's a wonderful concept. We're not figuring out what our divisor is. Once we're into this and we're headed down the path, when we say our budget goes up by 1% at the city of Minot, you immediately know your burden from the city of Minot goes up 1% on your bill. It's 1-to-1. It's not saying, oh, did we grow? It's not saying, did other properties come on or off the tax rolls? It's directly from the budget number we pass. And that's a powerful concept. If you want to put something in the minds of the locals to help them understand what's going on with their local officials, it's that. Because right now, as we went through what we did in Minot and the changes that came, my city share, because my assessment got hit, even though we lowered our levy by 20%, my city share stayed the same because my assessment went up. The opaque nature of that is what's killing us locally. And I don't think that people understand it. I think that we've got plenty of elected officials that don't understand mills to levy to what it's all doing. Okay. When we budget $24 million, you know that that's up 1%. My bill goes up 1%, straightforward. That's the one beauty of this. I talked to an economist about concepts for how you could divide things up. What's the right way to split the pie? Back to that general concept. He actually was from Great Britain. He talked about what Margaret Thatcher did in the 80s. I don't know if any of you known this or ever read about it, but they used something called the community charge. It moved them away from the idea of the property being the increment that you pay for services. Does a property really use a street or does it use a police function or a fire? Maybe you could make that case. But at the end of the day, people really use the services for the most part. And so what they did is they said, look, your divisor is people. If you've got 2 adults in your house, you're going to pay 2 shares of the pie. Now, you can see where that really gets out of hand, and the political pressures are eventually what killed that. And and move them away from that. It wasn't the fact that it wouldn't work from a financial or a numbers perspective. If you think about it, if you've got a renter making $25,000 a year, barely making ends meet with rent, they're paying the same share that a $500,000 homeowner might make if there's two people in each of those properties. So the point I'm trying to make is that this whole idea of moving away from the divisor is a powerful thing. That's a great thing. Because what will happen is, I believe the way I read it, you'll have to apply the residential portions of what you're doing first. So as new properties are coming on the rolls, they're all coming on at the full rate, and that's just more dollars coming in that apply to that portion. When you get beyond residential now and you get back to ad valorem for commercial properties, now you're dealing with growth and all that's going to happen. But I think the piece of the pie on the commercial side is actually going to lower if everybody's doing everything right. This is a complicated proposal, but I believe it really moves us in the right direction in a lot of ways. I don't have a perfect answer for how we transition in. I think that is a fabulous question. And how do we not hurt people that may have a large property at the lower end of the current value system? But keep in mind, all we're talking about there is a transition question, because if you really think about how services are rendered, do you get a different value for the trash that's picked up? Do you get a different value per square foot for a fire that might occur in that same square footage house? Is it a different burden on the fire department to send a firefighter in to try to save somebody? And so I think there's a lot to think about there, and I won't pretend to have the perfect answer for that. But at the same time, I think this is one of the very few proposals you will have in front of you that will truly change the structure of how we do things and put more pressure and onus on the local officials to get things right, because they're immediately going to face the flashback, and we can't hide behind anything opaque like value. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, one other thing I wanted to mention, just because it hits this bill, another maybe outlandish concept I wanted to throw in front of you. Right now, we exempt all government properties from all the calculations, just how we do it. One of the things I would submit to you is maybe that's not quite right. And again, does it make sense to have, Minot School Board send money to the city of Minot for the properties that we have? We're just moving the people's money around, right? One of the things, though, that I want you to maybe think about for a moment is that a city, a school, whoever it is, holds land. Is there any reason why they're holding land that they shouldn't be? Because there's no carrying costs right now. Maybe they got to mow or something like that. But is there a reason that we do that? As an example, in my very first council meeting last July, we had something in front of us where we were asked to approve the purchase of a land adjacent to our public works facility. I fought that tooth and nail. The first vote, we actually killed it 3-3 because we were missing one of our members. It later came back and now did get purchased with a 4-3 vote. That land originally, when we asked our city staff, what are you going to use it for? And they said, well, it's for expansion. We might put some laydown materials over there. We might do something. To me, there ought to be a cost for that carrying cost. And so I just throw that out because this bill actually does touch that section. Might not be a bad discussion as you get there. At the very least, if the city of Minot had to say, oh, school board, here's some money because of the land we hold in our city and we're keeping out of real productive use, there at least would be some conversations that we would have there. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
There's a lot of different perspectives coming out of that North Country of Minot. I can tell you that from past and what we've done and what you just addressed with church owning properties. But that's a discussion for a different day. Nonprofits, yeah.
You bet.
So we've heard the authors say that, this bill is going to shift burden around and that the state's going to have to provide a whole bunch of relief in order to minimize the impacts to the properties that we've discussed, large, less developed or not as valuable properties that have a lot of square footage. You've talked in the past about the state, going down the wrong path in providing relief to political subdivisions. And, I'm not just dismissing this bill as something that we shouldn't take a look at, but just your opinion here. Do you think that we could pass something like this blindly without knowing the implications, or Or does something as complex as this is going to be, does it need to be studied over a period of time? We're here for 80 days, and I think it would be irresponsible for us to just blindly pass this without knowing the implications. And I can tell you, I do know that we're not going to be able to find out the impacts of this while we're here. Do you think it's something that we should maybe look at, taking a look at over the interim? You're asking us to pass this here, that you support it, and I don't think we can quite visualize how we're going to get there with all the uncertainty, with it. And
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what I'm asking you
No,
to say.
and I
here,
actually,
but-
if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to at least answer what I think I heard from you. What I would say is I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a fundamental change. And as I believe you asked Representative Toman whether he had seen this anywhere. I did research into that to see, has it worked anywhere? What I found is that there's been a lot of discussion and no implementation. And so what that tells us is we'd be leading. Now, you'll always hear from me, I think North Dakota can lead in a lot of ways. And I think that can be okay if we do it the right way. And so to say that it's never been done doesn't mean that it shouldn't. But with that in mind, sir, I would say I see this as a long-term structural change. I don't think this is a fix to fix what's going on in the next 2 years anyway. So if you felt that a study was the right way to go about this, at least from my perspective, I would love to see that, because I think that as a long-term way of looking at it, I think it is right. And if it means that we get better perspectives on it, one of the things I was mentioning to a friend of mine is that, I stand before you, very learned people, lots of background, lots of different places that you came from. But I think you're like me, you're not an economist, right? You're being asked to make decisions on big tax issues that have supply and demand, fundamental economic questions that are going to follow them. That's difficult to do with, guys like me who, happen to serve on a city council giving you advice. So I have no issue with taking time to take a look at this. At the same time, I guess I wouldn't be true to what I've been saying to you if I didn't say, I think this may be the key proposal this entire session. This concept of finding a way to do it different may be the key thing that helps us get to local officials that do their jobs in a way that we would all prefer that they do. And so that's why I would really like to see whether it's this bill or something that leads to a bill maybe next session that's a better version. I think that'd be a great thing.
Representative Dressler has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blessum, would there be any cost savings for a city or a county regarding assessors, auditor operations around valuation? How do you think that whole process would work if we switch to square footage?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Representative, I do think, I think in my testimony a week and a half ago, I said, hey, Minot spends about $1 million on our assessor's office. This bill implemented the way that it is would lessen the load without question. Whether that's, it halves it, I can't really give you that. I'd have to work with our assessor to develop that, but certainly it lessens the load and it removes the sort of frenetic nature of everything that they do, right? They've got certain thresholds they've got to hit. They've got to equalize it, make sure that it's hitting the 90% threshold with the state. There's a ton of work there. There's no question that moving a majority of the properties is going to lighten that load, and there will be cost savings. And then that's my job to make sure if it does happen that we see the real cost savings. And again, we're on live here. I don't want anybody to ever take when I talk this way that I want to cut somebody's job. We want to reallocate the resources that we've got at the city to make sure we're using them to the best value for our constituents. And so we're going to look at that, and we would work with the assessor's office to make sure we've got that size correctly.
Representative Toman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blessum, I walked in late from another hearing, and I was hearing the study comments. We have, maybe not to this extent, but we've had studies in the past 2 legislative sessions that we have had nothing out of it except for, someone's own concept here. So I don't know that, knowing that, would you be more supportive of a study, or if would have to be a shell study and with specific to this type of bill? Because if we keep kicking the can down the road, we're never going to see change. So how would you see that working if you said, well, study warrant study, right? So.
So, Mr. Chairman and Representative, absolutely. I think, again, my goal in this whole thing is to move to something along these lines. We need to move to some aspect of the property that is our increment for how we handle things. If there's appetite to pass this now and continue work from here, I'm all for that. If it means next session with a shall study that's very specific to whether this can work and what tweaks need to come to it, I would be supportive of that, because for me, this is a long-term question of how we do this, not a fix it in 2 years. And so, Representative Toman, you did come in the middle of my comments. My point would be that we do move on something like this because I believe this is fundamental to how we do things in the state and gives us the best opportunity to do better.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Blessum,
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. Further support of House Bill 1474? Is there anyone else who would like to testify in support of House Bill 1474? Seeing none, is there opposition to House Bill 1474? Any opposition? Any questions of the Tax Department committee members? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 1474. We'll open the hearing on House Bill 1482. Would the clerk read the title, please?
Relating to the requirements of a municipal bond election.
Thank you. Representative Wagner, welcome to Finance and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.